If one wants to explore the mystical nature of our existence, then enhancing the Akash is a very vital and necessary aspect.
Shambho, Shambho, Shambho.
Once there is a certain amount of mastery over the five elements, one will find there is no such thing as what is inward and what is outward.
Anantakasho na kevalam maturangeva param tvayam jeeva.
The five elements that we recognize as the basic ingredients of life, this elemental magic, I'm calling it elemental magic because just with five things, not 5 million, just five things. With five things, too much has been done. With five things, what is presenting itself as cosmos, what is presenting itself as life, what is presenting itself as everything that we can see, hear, smell, taste and touch, is well beyond the permutations and combinations that we can think of. If something goes beyond the permutations and combinations, then it's no more mathematic, it is magic. So this elemental magic, to master this elemental magic is the most fundamental dimension of yoga. Essentially, when people want to be physically robust, then earth would be important. But for one who is on the spiritual path, one who wants to perceive, the most important thing is Akash. Why Akash becomes most important is, in the making of this human form, 72% of water, 12% of earth, 6% of air, 4% of fire is largely determined. The rest is Akash. When we said rest, we did not mean 6%, we said rest. Now, if you increase the proportion of Akash within the system, if you increase the proportion of Akash in the larger scape of who we are, then our ability to perceive is tremendously enhanced. If this proportion remains low or Akash is at its minimal in one's making, then their ability to perceive will be very minimal. Even if they have a great intellect, this intellect will forage in mundane things. It can never rise to perceive something more than that. So in this context, one important aspect of spiritual progress, one important aspect of Vigyan or Vishesh Gyan, if one wants to perceive beyond five senses, if one wants to perceive that which is not physical in nature, if one wants to extend his antenna to larger dimensions of life, if one wants to explore the mystical nature of our existence, then enhancing the Akash is a very vital and necessary aspect. Akash is a boundless dimension. When the composition of Akash is enhanced, then boundlessness becomes the nature of one's being. If not boundlessness, at least a boundary that you cannot see and feel. This gives the individual person a great sense of freedom, a great sense of not being tied down to anything. This lack of bondage within oneself is an essential amount of space that one needs if they want to have some mastery over these five elements. This goes for human system also. To keep this system well, to keep this system in an efficient and effective mode, but not being identified with it, is a very important or the very important step one has to take if one has to have mastery over elements. Once there is a certain amount of mastery over the five elements, one will find there is no such thing as what is inward and what is outward, because elements don't respect your boundaries. To put it in the simplest form, as you sit here, you breathe. The air does not respect your boundary, it is constantly in and out. This is not just air, this is happening with everything. The food that you eat and whatever substance we relieve ourselves of and everything else is in constant transaction, or the elements do not respect the boundaries of your body. The boundaries of your body are only for your psychological comfort, but the five elements have no respect for that, and they anyway transact without your permission. So if you have some access to experiencing the nature of the elements, then you also lose the boundaries of your body. Or in other words, you have sacrificed your privacy because there is no such thing as privacy, because you know everything is seeping in and everything is seeping out constantly. When one wants to gain mastery, one of the things that are commonly done is those of you sitting in America or anywhere else in the world right now, including India, don't try to do this. You will see the spiritual movements of the past, whether you take the yogis like the Nagas or the Gorakhnathis or the Jains, one of the things that they do at at the basic level of sadhana is, first thing is to expose themselves to elements because they want the transaction to happen freely. As today, walking around naked in the world is not a possibility, though in India it is still in practice. You will see thousands of them walking naked, not bothered about the social norms. That is not a possibility for all of you. So one simple thing that you can do is move to a looser level of clothing. Well, you may not look shapely, but there is no shape to you on the elemental scape. It is in constant transaction. To facilitate this, to be able to be conscious of this, one important thing is there is a little bit of space between your body and what you wear, that it is not tight-fitting clothes. This is one step that one can take to… If you pay attention, you will see beyond this breath, a whole lot of transaction is happening constantly across the body. If one pays enough attention to this transaction, then one will also slowly understand the nature and the composition of the elements within us, then enhancing one dimension or increasing the Akash in the system through appropriate practice becomes a possibility. And of course, once I say this, the first question is, Sadhguru, what is that practice? Practice doesn't come first, attention comes first. By attention, if one knows that there is transaction, not by intellect, but by attention, if one knows that there is a transaction, then how to tweak the transaction in our favor is something we can do. First thing is to take charge of the most obvious transactions. The most obvious transactions are breath, food, consumption of water, and the temperature of the body, and the temperature outside. These are the most obvious transactions. Just pay a little more attention to these obvious transactions. It always amazes me how breath, which is such an obvious transaction, and it doesn't happen quietly, it moves the entire body. But most people never ever notice it. If you can't notice your breath, how to notice anything subtler than that, because breath is a noisy activity, it is happening. If you bring attention to these things, how you eat, how you drink, how you breathe, how you touch everything that you touch, you will see the experience of life will rise to a completely different level. These simple things most human beings are not doing. They're gulping down what they eat and drink, they breathe completely unconsciously, they touch anything and everything without knowing what they're touching or feeling it. Largely it's happening like this for most people. If you bring awareness to that, if you bring… let me not even use the word awareness because it means many things to many people, bring more attention to that. If you are far more attentive to these things, then without slowing down anything, this is important, because People think that when you're breathing, you should not be doing anything else, just you must be breathing. When you're eating, you must be eating, when you're drinking, you must be drinking. No, that is the beauty of being human, that we have a cerebral capability of conducting complex activity within us and still be able to pay attention. It is like you're driving and you can still have a conversation with somebody. So two levels of attention are happening, just like this. You could be doing whatever you're doing, but pay attention to the breath. Breath is one thing that is always happening, so you can pay attention to that. You can also pay attention to the food that you eat and water that you drink. Let it not happen all the time. So the possibility of knowing dimensions of the beyond, the possibility of dipping into the mystical nature of the existence is very much rooted in the elemental composition of who we are, bringing about a transformation in this can do fantastic things to you, but one must also understand that fantastic things can also turn your life upside down. Nobody said Akasha is space, we said Akash is ether. That's not an appropriate translation, but reasonably. Ether is not space, ether is a certain dimension of existence, subtle. When we say space, we are talking about kala or non-existence. We are talking about Shiva, that which is not. When we say Akash, we are talking about that which is. Here you are. Here you are as a human being. There are many levels from grossness to subtleness here. If you have constipation, you still have something gross inside you. Above that, there is a little more refined aspects of body. Above that, there is a lung full of air. Above that, there's a brain and thought and emotion and so many things. And there is life going in and out. And there is Akasha involved. There is water, there is physical material, there is air, there is temperature, there's fire, and there is Akash which makes this. Don't try to understand that, just get this right, because this is a mini cosmos. So if you perceive this right, you know that because today there is no question about this anymore. We've always been saying this in the yogic dimension, but today modern physics has come up with what is called as the constructional theory, which is talking about how the design factor in the universe, whether it's atomic or cosmic, is fundamentally same design. You as a human being with this kind of form, a grasshopper, an earthworm, a bird, a crawly creature somewhere, all of you have same fundamental design. From atomic to cosmic, the fundamental design is same. The complexity and sophistication of how this design evolves into multiple forms is different. Your design is far more complicated and sophisticated compared to that of an amoeba, but the fundamental design is still same. Only the complexity is increasing. So you don't go about trying to observe the cosmos because you don't have a gallery view of the cosmos. You cannot. There's no place where you can sit and observe cosmos. And in fact, you cannot observe anything except what happens within you. Even if you take a telescope and look at the star is happening only the way it projects in your mind, isn't it? Yes? You don't see any star. This is the reason why you see stars which don't actually exist. Many stars that you see don't exist, but they're projected in your mind in a certain way, and that's how you know it. Or in other words, you only can experience this, or this is the only doorway through which you can experience anything. Whether you want to experience the food that you eat, or the air that you breathe, or the people around you, or the world around you, or the cosmos, you can only experience it the way this is. If this is very clear, you will see it the way it is. If it has taken many forms and shapes, you will see it in so many different ways. These days, I think largely the mirrors have gotten flat, you know. Even now, I think if you buy some cheap mirror, you will look like this. But if you get certain types of concave mirrors, you can definitely reduce your weight in a day. You just go stand, you look like a dash-on. So, the mirrors give different impressions of who you are. Suppose you always looked at your face with a slightly distorted mirror. After some time, you will assume that's how you look. Yes or no? Yes or no? You think that's how you look. Because every day you looked at yourself and that's how you looked, and you think that's how you look. So even now, you think the world looks this way simply because that's how it's projected in your mind. If you evolve this mind to a more refined surface, that there's absolutely no any kind of wavering in it, it is perfectly plain mirror, then it will reflect everything the way it is, but upside down. You know, in the mirror, everything is like this. So now you must have the intelligence to correct this without distorting it. See, most people can't turn a dosa around properly. If they try to turn the dosa around, it'll become those kind of things. It takes certain skill to take something like this and turn it around without distorting it. So this is the problem with the mind. One thing is, already it is wavy or choppy, whichever way you kept your mind, but it is definitely wavy. You're seeing the world in the wavy mirror and it's looking certain way. And most people have never attempted to turn it around because they think that's how it is. When you want to turn it around, it takes a certain amount of skill to be able to turn it around without distorting it. So you have two problems. One is to first flatten the mirror so that it is undistorted, and now a much bigger task of wanting to flip it around without any distortion. So that is… we have not approached that in your life yet. First to make the mirror absolutely without distortions. We still working on that one. Is this air very much a part of you as a life? Those who do not say anything, we're going to throttle you. Your life is spread all over here, isn't it? This is physical. Even in this physical, there are many levels of crudeness and subtlety, isn't it? There are very gross elements in the body, there are subtler elements in this body, there is thought, there is emotion, there is air that you breathe. Or in other words, life is always from a hardcore crudeness to many subtleties. Depends how much you spread, that is how much subtlety you have in your life. How wide your wings spread, that much of subtlety is possible. So now what we're referring to as Akasha is a subtle dimension of life. If you suck out the Akasha, you cannot exist here. If we suck out the air from this hall, you cannot exist here. Though you cannot see it, still it is more vital than your hair, I'm sorry. Because there is more money spent on hair care on the planet, definitely a lot more than the brain care. You see where our values are. If you pull out all your hair, you can still live. If I cut your ears, you can still live. If I cut your nose, you can still live. If I just suck out this air that you cannot even see, most of the time you're not even conscious whether it exists or not. If I suck out the air, you cannot live for a moment, isn't it? If we suck out the Akasha, you cannot live for a moment. There is a there's a temple in Karnataka, in southern India, which is called the Annapurneshwari temple. Anybody from Karnataka? You been to Annapurneshwari? So, at the rear part of the temple where most people may not go, because I am always poking into nooks and corners, others are all happy looking at the goddess. There is an inscription in Hale Kannada, that means the old type of Kannada, which is over 3,000 years old. There's an inscription talking about how to design an airplane in a temple. And they're saying, you can do like this, but if you fly these machines, it will disturb the ether in the planet. If it disturbs the Akasha, when they say Akasha, don't think space. When they're saying if you disturb the Akasha, then human beings will not know peace in their life. Once Akasha is disturbed, then psychological disturbances will become enormous. I think you're a living proof. I think there was an old movie by Manoj Kumar which said, sure, airplanes and the disturbance that it's causing, and he's glad his ears went away one day. Something like that, yes? So, if we suck out the Akasha, this physical body will not exist for a moment. So when we say Akasha, we are still talking about 5 elements. As you yourself in the question you mentioned, among the 5 elements, Akash is one. So when we say elements, we are not talking about empty space. We are talking about one more substance. Like earth, like water, like air, like fire, we are talking about one more aspect of 5 elements. So do not mistake Akash for empty space.